Okay, so this will be a short video, 10 to 15-minute video, I hope, that tackles the topic of why is it important to reduce us versus them polarization, and how do we do that? And so this will be a quick summary. Obviously, my ideas, but those ideas can overlap with other people who have worked on depolarization and conflict resolution. Um, and I think one thing I wanted to do with this video was to try to include some overcome some common objections that people have when they hear about the problem of polarization and why depolarization is important. And if you don't know, my name is Zachary Elwood, and you can find my podcast. It's a psychology focused podcast at behavior-podcast.com. And I often focus on polarization for several topics, several episodes on that. Okay, I'll go into the share screen mode. And so, yeah, let's first define the problem of polarization. What is it? Uh, when most people talk about polarization, political polarization being extreme, they're talking about increasing polarization, both ideological and emotional, that gets so bad that it makes society more fractured, more dysfunctional, more unstable. These are things all the way from, increased gridlock all the way up to the really bad situations like civil war or just a lot of violence. And what is the primary goal of depolarization work when people say they that we need to fix the problem of polarization? Now, to me, my take is that the goal should be to significantly reduce the amount of hateful, divisive, and insulting language that's aimed at political opponents. And this is not about changing people's beliefs. That's a common objection people have. You're trying to depolarize our beliefs, change our beliefs, make them more moderate. But really, it's about the focus on the more unreasonable aspects of our animosity. And it's not saying you can't work hard towards a political goal or even dislike or even hate people on the other side, but it's recognizing the role that the more hateful and insulting language plays, and trying to reduce instances of that as much as we can, because seeing that as part of the problem. And to do a quick, a quick example here of what I'm talking about, these are just some examples of the kind of extreme, us versus them language people use. I'm sure we're all familiar with this kind of thing. Republicans want civil war. They want to kill us. They're saying it. It's what Republicans are. No, really, they want to kill us. It's us against them. Make no mistake. This is a war, and a war we must win to save the United States of America. Uh, I have a whole list of these things, and it's pretty easy to find them. You could go on Twitter or social media every day and find many of these are pretty extreme. The other side is completely horrible and irredeemable. I think what's more important to recognize, though, is that there are more subtle versions of us versus them language that often go without notice, but that are also important. I'll just give one example here. In 2022, Biden gave a speech in which he many times used the phrase MAGA Republicans to describe, the more extreme Republicans as he saw them. He would say things throughout the speech like MAGA Republicans spread fear and lies, MAGA Republicans did this or did other things. But his choice of language can be criticized as divisive because it's unclear what he means by MAGA Republicans. He may have meant to single out a specific subset of Trump supporters that he saw as extreme, but a lot of people will interpret that phrase as just meaning the whole group, anyone who voted for Trump. And to support the idea that some conservatives did find that wording polarizing, one Trump voter responded on Twitter: MAGA is not some extreme wing of the GOP. It is the hardworking average American who wants less government interference in their lives and lower taxes. Now, this is I chose a specifically subtle example that I still think is an example of polarizing language. And these are the kinds of things that are around us all the time that often pass without notice. It's these subtle or not so subtle group aimed insults. And I have a whole collection of, that run the spectrum between the more extreme ones and the more subtle ones. But I think part of the solution is keying in more to where these group insults to the different groups, where they are located, how they play out, and being aware how they contribute to polarization. So getting back to the main premise, when I say why the main goal, when I say the main goal is or should be reducing expressions of this us versus them animosity, the more extreme versions of it, especially. I say that because I choose that as the main lever, the main goal, because anger is the core driver of polarization. Anger begets anger, which begets more anger. You could substitute other negative emotions in there too, fear and feeling threatened and loathing and such. But I think a lot of it comes down to anger. So in other words, it's a feedback cycle, and I'll show you this little graphic I made. We speak about the other side in more insulting and demeaning ways. When we do that, the other side sees us as even more immoral and dangerous than they did before. They in turn speak about us in more insulting and demeaning ways. And we see the other side as more immoral and dangerous than we did before. And we speak about them in such ways. So it keeps going like that. And that's, if you look at many conflicts, it can be seen as a feedback loop. So this is another subset of the feedback cycle. We can see how the more anger there is in society, the more expressions of anger and animosity they are, the more power that gives to the most polarized people. And so those people, the more polarized leaders and influencers, uh, speak in polarizing ways once they're in power, which in turn creates more anger and animosity amongst the public. So it's a feedback cycle there, just kind of a subset of the feedback cycle we just looked at. And this is it's not as clear, you can see it's not as clear as the people in power are polarizing us, because it's hard to say, how much where they fit into the cycle. They could also be seen as just people trying to take advantage, uh, or chosen by the people who have a lot of anger. So I think a lot of times people have kind of simplistic understandings of it's the media doing this, or it's these specific leaders doing that. But I think the way the cycle works, it makes you see that if it weren't those people, there'd probably be other people taking their place, who would either be true believers, uh, actual have genuine anger, or be incentivized to take advantage of the polarizing winds. So getting back to the idea that, why is the main goal reducing these expressions of animosity? One big reason there is that political animosity can actually polarize our beliefs and make us more extreme. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But also, as we have more power, more anger, we start to perceive more and more issues through a moral lens. And I'm sure we can all think of examples of this, of how our dislike of the other side makes even somewhat minor issues sometimes feel like there's a righteous and a bad side, and the moralization um, of those issues makes us less willing to negotiate and makes us more hardlined. So for these reasons, we can view us versus them anger as helping create the very things we're angry about. And I want to dig in a little bit more to that idea. There was a study that I think showed this pretty well, this dynamic, about how our animosity can shift our beliefs and make them more extreme. It was a study by James Druckmann and his colleagues. It found that political animosity pre-COVID was predictive of more polarized COVID-related beliefs and behaviors. So in short, and they adjusted for several factors that you might think of. In short, it seemed like animosity was driving people's beliefs, making the beliefs more extreme. And when I talked to Druckmann via email correspondence, the way he put it was, our theory is that as effective polarization increases for someone, and effective polarization is, us versus them, animosity fueled polarization. As that happens, they become more likely to align their beliefs with those of party elites. Party elites tend to be more ideologically polarized, and thus the more effectively polarized follow the cues of the elites, and that leads them to become more polarized on issues, as was the case with COVID-19 policies. So that's one big reason why, to me, when I make the case to people who are politically passionate, uh, part of this is making the case that the animosity is helping create some of the things we're angry about. And if we can see that dynamic, we can get the politically passionate on board, because they can start to see how these dynamics can even help create the very things that are making us upset on the other side. And another point about why I say reducing these expressions of animosity are so important, as opposed to other things. Other people have various ideas on how to work on polarization, how to reduce it. But in my opinion, if we don't dramatically lower the us versus them animosity, most other approaches won't succeed. And I'll give you one example there. A lot of people focus on the idea of misinformation and the threat of it. But in my opinion, misinformation is not going away. It's always going to be a problem, because it's easier than ever to create bad information and easier than ever to spread it. And so to me, the problem is not getting people, reducing misinformation, or getting people to be more media savvy, and more critical thinking in their approaches. Those are all nice things too. But I think as long as there's a lot of us versus them animosity, there will be high supply and demand for information that aligns with that animosity. And that's just one example of how I think, without solving the core problem of the us versus them animosity, we're not going to get solutions. There's also ideas people put forward about, for example, ranked choice voting, or other policy approaches that will, they think will reduce the polarization problem. But I do think that, we're so gridlocked and angry that I just don't see those problems being implemented. And I think there's still a chance that, that there's other factors at work too uh, that may make the polarization continue. So these are all just some reasons why I view it as the fundamental problem, as tackling the emotion and the distorted views people have of each other. So how do we accomplish the goal of depolarization if our goal is reducing the us versus them emotions and views in a society? We do this by trying to convince as many people as we can to see depolarization work as important, and to share these ideas with others. And this is kind of my little joke here, but we want to infect people with a contagious depolarization mind virus that spreads to other people. And obviously, that's just a way to say persuade people of the problem, right? It's just getting them to see the problem how we see it. People interested in depolarization see it. And how do we convince people that it's important to do these things? To me, I think it's important to try to induce some emotion, some different kinds of emotion, to make people motivated to want to take this seriously and work on it. I think some of the things we can show people are why polarization should scare them, show them, the worst case scenarios, and what we theoretically have to lose, people on both sides, and how things can fall apart more easily than we think. Things like this, examples from other countries, and how most of the world is growing more polarized now. We can show them the dynamics of how polarization works and grows, because with better understanding, people can't ignore that understanding, and it will naturally impact how they behave, and how they tell other people about it. We can show them that their views of the other side can be very distorted, so we can help them see the role that they play in the polarization, and that sense of responsibility may impact their behaviors. And then maybe, also giving people hope in the sense that if a critical mass of people worked on these things at some point, things would flip pretty quickly. And so giving people the hope that if more and more people took these ideas seriously, we could change things. So how do we lower people's internal anger about these issues? And first, I'll say that I don't think uh, this is technically required because you can be quite angry. You could have very high rage at the other side while still believing in depolarization principles because you could, for example, see that the expressions of rage are unhelpful and will only make things worse. So that theoretically is possible, but I think in practice, there's some level of animosity that people have. If they're above that level of animosity, they're not going to be too motivated to help with depolarization. So I think it's important to try to reduce people's anger at the other side. And how do we do that? We try to correct distorted perceptions that we have, and many of us have distorted perceptions. We have distorted perceptions about the number of opponents who hold extreme views on the other side, and research shows this. And you can find many studies saying, Democrats think X number of Republicans are this way, but it's actually significantly lower, and vice versa. Not only the number of people with views that hold extreme views, though, I would say often we have distorted perceptions of the motives for why opponents hold various views. For example, thinking that someone who wants dramatically lower immigration is a racist or a bigot when you can find, uh, you know, many arguments, rational and well-meaning arguments for those kinds of stances. For example, Bernie Sanders was for most of his career very much for lower immigration because he thought high immigration hurt the American worker and the American workers' salaries and such. So this is just to say a lot of these problems, the motives that we view people as having for their stances can be very distorted, and it's good to examine that. And it's good to examine nuance in general, not just of people, but about the world. For example, when we see an event happening, a current event that's getting some rage on either side, sometimes the situation is a lot more nuanced and complex and doesn't fit into easy us versus them binaries as we tend to think. So when it comes to getting people to spread the word, which I think is, what we want to do when it comes to this movement, we want to get the word out there. But there's different ways to get the word out there. So I thought it'd be helpful to be specific about the things we want people to do. And I put these three major things in order of easiest to hardest. I think the easiest thing is just to practice more de-escalating approaches and more calm approaches when interacting with others. I think that's the natural, easiest result when people learn about polarization dynamics and how they work. People will naturally take these approaches when talking to people they know, people they work with, people online. And I've heard stories from people who say, oh, this has really made me slow down and not overreact and try to be more respectful even when disagreeing. Um, so I think that's the low bar really. Then it comes to a slightly harder thing, spreading the word, which is pointing people to the depolarization ideas, trying to get them to understand the problem and what the possible solutions are. And that would mean, for example, pointing people to a video like this or all the depolarization books out there that people have written on the right and the left about this. Then probably the hardest thing to get people to do, but I see it as very important, is pushing back on divisive, insulting rhetoric or very biased takes from people on your own side. And I put on your own side in italics there because it really is when it comes to making change, we really can't change people who are on the other side or who are politically quite different from us because they'll view us with suspicion. And research shows that you really can only have impacts on people on your side. And that's why I think, we focus so much of our efforts on the other side and insulting and shaming them. But really all that does is just our instincts there to hurt the other side only end up making the more extreme people on that side stronger, and so on and so on. just amplifying polarization. So I think it's about recognizing how that works and then respectfully pushing back on those ideas. And it would take the form of, for example, one senator saying to another senator, what you said there, I agree with your basic premise, but the way you spoke about Republicans was really a polarizing and insulting way to speak about them. And you can make your point without insulting, all Republicans. These kinds of things, criticizing people's rhetoric while drawing attention to the polarization dynamics and how it's all related. And also, I think something that's important here is thinking about the so-called politically homeless, the people who feel like neither side, that they don't relate anymore to either side that much. I think a lot of these people kind of drop out and are disheartened and a bit bitter. They just want to, they just see both sides as crazy or whatever. But I think they can play a valuable role. And for the depolarization movement, we want to show those people that their skepticism and their non-tribalism can be valuable tools. And so we want to show them that they can play an important role in helping America. And I think that's important. Just basically getting more people on board and showing them how they can be valuable. So this has been a pretty brief summary of the ideas that are top of mind for me when it comes to depolarization work. If you want to learn more about this topic, check out recommendations of depolarization related books at my site, american-anger.com. That's the site for my book that I'm working on. You can listen to my podcast, People Who Read People. I have quite a few episodes on polarization related topics. And I'll soon be releasing an early draft of my ebook within the next few days on my site, american-anger.com. Honestly, wanted to put more work into it, but I'm kind of burnt out on it right now. So I just thought I'd put out an ebook of what I have and work on it more over time. Hopefully, this presentation made sense and helped some people see why people view polarization as such a big problem. Thanks for your time.